to the press briefing by the European Union Agency for Railways. I'm Josef Doppelbauer. I'm the Executive Director of the agency, ERA in short. I will be your moderator for this morning, where we will focus mostly on the information and data aspects of rail. But before we go to the detailed presentations, I just wanted to give you some general remarks on the railway system in Europe and on some highlights of 2024. If we look at railways in general, we can see two very strong advantages. The one, and in the context of the climate crisis, very important advantage of rail is the energy efficiency and the low emissions of CO2. In comparison with road and with aviation, rail is between 5 to 10 times better. It depends, of course, on the type of transport and on the distance. To the left, you see the latest statistics from the European Transport Pocketbook, and there you can see that the railway system in the European Union only contributes 0.4% to the CO2 emissions of transport, whereas a road has a contribution of 76.3%. So an obvious strategy for reducing the CO2 emissions of transport is to shift as much as possible the transport from road to rail. To the right, you see another significant advantage of rail, which is safety. And there you can see that the safety of a railway passenger is about 40 times higher than a passenger in a car. In these figures, we have not included the casualties from level crossing accidents, which are significant contributor in railway terms, because it's about 300 casualties per year. But from a road perspective, the 300 casualties on level crossing is only about 1.5%, because in the European Union per year you have about 20,000 people killed on the road. So for rail it's a very, very high number, the accidents of level crossing, but from a road perspective it's marginal. This is also one of the explanations why it is at that high level. Unfortunately, there are two downsides for rail, and the one downside is, of course, that rail is expensive, so the construction of the infrastructure and the maintenance of the infrastructure is costing money, and this money is not always invested in all the countries. And the other important aspect that causes issues for rail is the possible impact of disturbances. Disturbances can be equipment failure, can be track failures, but can also be external events, weather, flooding, wind, etc. So in this context, the agency works. Globally, we are responsible for interoperability, safety, and since 2019 we are also European Union Authority for the Authorization of Vehicles and the Certification of Railway Undertakings. I will give you a few highlights of our activities in the next few moments. The first aspect is related to railway safety. Unfortunately, on the 28th of February this year, there was a catastrophic accident in Tempe in Greece, around 30 kilometers north of Larissa. 57 people were killed, including the 5 drivers in the cabs, and more than 85 people were injured. Now we are in December. The juridical investigation is still ongoing since the accident. The European Commission has asked ERA to produce a report according to the Article 35, paragraph 5 of our regulation on the implementation of railway law in Greece. We have delivered that report in October. The important aspect in response to any accident is to do an independent investigation of the accident. The national investigating body has finally been appointed in Greece. A kick-off meeting was held the 30th of October, and in turn the agency has received a formal request for support. According to our regulation, we are obliged to give support to national investigating bodies when they wish so. So we have appointed a task force who will support the Greek in the independent assessment. In parallel, we have also carried out an assessment of the status of ERTMS implementation in Greece, and the report is due in December this year. Every tragic accident is an opportunity for learning to prevent further occurrences of such accident, and we have also taken the occasion of the Greek accident in order to propose some improvements to the system in Europe. One proposal that we have made is to establish a so-called information sharing system, ISS, for better exchange of information between the operators and the authorities and the member states. And we also see a strong disparity in the safety levels of the member states. So we are proposing a priority country program to give specific support to the countries that are in particular need of this support. These two items have been proposed firstly to our management board in November. We got overwhelming support by the management board, and now we are in discussion with the Commission and our budget authority, which is the European Parliament and the Council, to make those tasks, those work streams a reality. Now, there is a strong interest lately into night trains, and one of the problems with the introduction of night trains has been the lack of appropriate vehicles. So what is currently running on the European tracks has an age that is at least 30 years, because night trains were decreasing over the past years and were just revitalized lately. Now, the Austrian Federal Railways have ordered a new generation of night trains from Siemens, and on the 24th of November we authorized this first generation of night trains for operation initially in 4 countries: Germany, Austria, Switzerland and Italy. These trains have, I would say, a game-changing new level of comfort, and they also are able now to run at 230 kilometers per hour, which makes it possible for the trains also to use high-speed tracks. What is important to note that the authorization by ERA took 5 months. The application came to us in June. If the old regime would have been applicable, then an initial authorization would have to be made in one country and then the next country and so on. We can only estimate, but the process would at least have taken 1.5 years. So it's a significant advantage to have this European process, and we are actually proud to having achieved that milestone, and we got very positive resonance. I have a quote here from LinkedIn. One of the commentators said that this is a practical example how the fourth railway package can help to bring innovations to the market. Now, just to tell you that in 2019 the agency took up the tasks as authority, European authority. We have now almost 5 years of experience, and so sometimes it works too slow, sometimes it works too fast. So this is where I wanted to go. Since we have taken up our authority activities, we have now taken more than 6,000 decisions on vehicle authorization. We have authorized, and these are the figures as of the 30th of November, we have authorized 67,500 vehicles. We could possibly even reach 70,000 by year end. In February this year we authorized the 50,000th vehicle, which you can see on the picture to the right, where coincidentally, as it was a vehicle from the Belgian National Railways SNCB, we organized a small celebration at Gare de Midi here in Brussels. So, meaning that in 2023 we have almost authorized 20,000 vehicles. You can imagine that this is an industrial process now, so this is not small business. It's really heavy and highly automized work. In terms of, let's call it market share, the agency is now authorizing around 70% of the vehicles that are authorized in the European Union. 30%, meaning less than half of what the agency does, is authorized by the totality of all national safety authorities. And the largest number of authorization by a safety authority is 7%, and this is the Polish authority. So agencies authorizing 10 times more than the largest of the national safety authorities. In terms of single safety certificates, on the 30th of November we were at 199. On Monday, 4th of December, I have signed the 200th safety certificate, so we are at 200 now, and we have a backlog of 25 projects ongoing. For the ERTMS trackside approval, we will reach 15 by year end, so we are currently at 14. We can proudly say that the introduction of the new process has worked. Our workload is increasing, so we get more and more applications. We, of course, are struggling with the resources in order to be able to respond, but we also clearly see that it is in the interest of the European sector, and it's a precondition, for instance, for introducing new night train services, for instance, by new entrants. On the policy side, a major achievement has been the vote and the subsequent publication and entry into force of the TSI package 2022-2023. As you know, the agency prepares recommendations for these technical specifications for interoperability, which in turn are discussed with the member states and finally voted. For this package, the vote took place on the 30th of March, and the entry into force followed on the 28th of September. There are some important topics in this new TSI package. For the first time, we have a legal basis for combined transport, so the codification of lines and of wagons is now in the TSI. We have also introduced a new important tool which is called unique authorization. Freight wagons, since 2019, are authorized by the agency, because for freight there is no national rules. And we have now introduced a similar concept for coaches, for passenger coaches, which will be important also for the context of night trains, but also for new entrants. It is more difficult for coaches because we have electricity on these vehicles, and of course we are not yet there for the EMUs and the locomotives, because there we have the additional complexity of the signaling system. And also importantly, the new TSI contains a number of changes to the European Rail Traffic Management System, ERTMS, in particular the game changers, modularity, automated train operation in crate of automation 2, and also the provision for the new radio. Now, I'm coming to the subject of today, and we are increasingly becoming digital. Digital as a railway sector, and of course digital also as European Union Agency for Railways. Rail is a sector with a large number and large variety of physical assets. We have tracks, vehicles, terminals, etc. And we know also from experience of other sectors that digitalization can be a key means to increasing the efficiency of using these access. But, and here we come to the downside, the European railway sector has always been characterized by the fragmentation and the barriers between the member states. So in physical terms, there's different track size, different catenary voltages, different signaling systems, and now we have to make sure that these barriers are not built for the railway data. And with the press briefing today, we would like to highlight to you several important developments in terms of information sharing for rail and in terms of creating a new interoperable data landscape. So the two highlights that we will present to you today is Railway Factsheets, and my colleague Mitchell van Balen, who is an expert in our monitoring and analysis unit, will present, including a demo, the new information source that we provide for you on our website, and which can be very helpful when somebody intends to do an analysis where we are and where we possibly could go. And to my right we have Chris Carr, head of the unit in the Agency for Operational Data Management, and Chris will explain to us the concept of linked data, which is our tool to make sure that we have fair access to data, fair standing for findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. So these are the two topics that we will be focusing this morning, and afterwards of course we will be available for any question that you might have. And without any further ado, I hand over to Mitchell to introduce the Railway Factsheet.
Right. So, would this work? Yes, great. Thank you very much, Joseph, for this introduction, and also on my behalf, very warm welcome to everybody in the room. I'm very happy today to present the fact sheets, and in order to explain why I'm happy to do so, I would like to give some more information on the context of where we come from. So, it's well known that the European railway system has been set up historically fragmented along the national borders, and that applies for rolling stock, it applies to infrastructure, but certainly also applies to data, which has been typically collected and stored along national and organizational borders. Now, ERA was set up to reduce technical barriers for interoperability and to support the creation of a single European railway area. And in this process, we also have set up registers with information to support this mission. Now, over time, the quality of the data and the amount of the data that we collected has increased substantially. And we also came to the realization that beyond the purpose for which these registers initially were set up, there are more opportunities. There are opportunities to use this data better in different ways. And one of the examples that we want to present today are the ERA Railway fact sheets. So the fact sheets are a key example of how the railway data that are collected can be used better. It's the first time that there is an intuitive and comprehensive overview of the railway sector across Europe. So with one click you get insight in the railway sector of all the European countries, and you get information on about 90 indicators in seven different categories. So on transport statistics, organizations, rolling stock, infrastructure, the market, safety, and also the regulatory framework. So it's a quite holistic overview that these fact sheets provide. Now, why was this challenging to achieve so? First of all, because of the databases that have been set up. As I was saying, like these databases, the registers in which ERA stores information, have been set up under different legal mandates over time with a very specific purpose. They have not been created necessarily to share statistics, to share insights to a broader audience. So what we had to do was also to look into these different registers, so the European Vehicle Register, the Register on Infrastructure, on the Common Safety Indicator data, and to integrate them all and to say present them, to edit them in a way that data is understandable and easy to retrieve for a broader audience. Another thing that we did is also that we looked at other important railway data sources that are being collected by other organizations. To give an example, the European Commission is also collecting information on the market situation of railways in the RMS, or the Railway Market Monitoring Study, and this information also gives important feedback on the evolution of railways. Besides that, you have Eurostat, which collects information on basic statistics. And we believe that by integrating all those sources, so from the agency and from other institutions, we get a pretty good picture of what the railway sector looks like and where it's heading to. So by doing so, we provide, say, we move from a situation where it's practically unattainable for a non-specialized audience to get the insights in the railway sector, to a situation where with a click of a button you can access that information. And we'll show this to you in a bit. So some more information on why we think these fact sheets are important and what the derived benefits could be. Well, first of all, we see it on the European level because we think that the sharing of information really can promote innovation. To give a tangible example, so currently the sector is heavily investing in research and also developing the digital automatic coupler, which is a coupling system between freight system that also has a communication capabilities and energy capabilities. Now, for this process to have a better understanding of what the implications of this implementation will be, it's evidently necessary to understand how many wagons do you have, what will be the investment needed to retrofit a large part of the European fleet. At the beginning of this project, it was very difficult to get consistent statistics on how the European fleet looks like. So for a rather basic question, it already was quite challenging to get these insights. Now, time and resources have been spent to aggregate statistics from different sources, and it has been a rather cumbersome exercise. We believe that by opening up this time, these resources can be spent more efficiently on innovative processes, and this will benefit the sector as a whole. Linked to this, we also think that by providing a single source of authoritative data also will reduce the administrative burden of data collection on railways, both for European projects and for national projects. So it will benefit the sector as a whole. We also see a benefit on the national level. Like the fact sheets, as you will see in a bit, also make it rather easy to compare member states, countries amongst each other. So it also is a rather, let's say, first good look at how the countries compare, and it is an input for evaluating, benchmarking what the performance of one country is with another, and also from which countries lessons could be potentially learned. Finally, and I also have to underline this, railway data comes from very far. as I said, historically it always has been fragmented, so the definitions that have been applied and the quality of the collection process differs by theme and by area and by region. Now, with these fact sheets, we have a tool in which it becomes quite clear, say, where some special observations can be made, where the data might not be as good or as consistent as we would like to be. So this also provides us a tool to inquire further. How has data been stored? Has it been aligned or defined in a similar way? And to have contact with those data providers on reaching a higher reliability. So that's a bit where we come from, and I would like to present to you also these fact sheets. But before I would do so, maybe Jesse, if possible, we can show my screen for a second. Perfect, thanks. So before we continue with the fact sheets and some information that we can derive from it, I want to have like a quick look in the room to see like if you already had a look at the fact sheets or if generally your knowledge about the railways is already quite broad. So first question that I want to ask is the safest country in 2022 in terms of significant accident rates. We have 4 countries here: the Netherlands, Ireland, Poland and Luxembourg. Anybody's willing to make a guess? It goes in the right direction, but it's not. Ireland was the safest one. The country with the most certified freight operators. Again, 4 choices: Germany, France, Poland, Czechia. See people very confident that it's Germany. Again, here it's Poland. But this is a German question. So, what's the median age? How old would you say would an average diesel log be in Germany? We have 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. It's 30 years, and I wanted to present these examples because like these are basic facts, but they are very important facts, like when you do the analysis, when you want to understand the sector. And I can show you a bit more in depth also what it means and where these facts can be derived from the fact sheets. So to start with, the fact sheets can be retrieved from the ERA website. So the quickest way to get through them is by clicking on the main page to the ERA Railway Factsheets. Then you will be brought to this page where you see the overview of all the countries, and you can click on the country to access any of the fact sheets. What is also important for researchers, for journalists, for anybody interested in railways, you can also access the raw input data, because we believe it's also important that people use the data for their own analysis, that you can also come back to us, also see what's good, what can be improved. So by clicking on this file, you will find in an Excel file information on the methodological limitations, but also on the raw input data, so you can also create your own graphics or do your own analysis. So that's as a side note. While preparing, I saw that there were several attendees today in the room from Italy, so if you propose, I can go to the fact sheets of Italy and show you some statistics on that. So when you click on Italy, this is the overview that you will get, and you see that here on the left side you have the 7 categories, and you can click through them to quickly move to the area that's of your interest. But to start with the top, we have some basic transport statistics that paint a picture of what the country is like. You see all the main key indicators that we think are quite essential to understand it. The year for the measurement for which the data was available, the unit, the value, and on the right side you see like a small trend chart, spark line, to give a first indication of how it evolves. But the most interesting part is when you click on it, you unfold it, and you see the visual. So here you also have the interactive visuals where you can see the values by year. And when we look at passenger transport, evidently we have the COVID period where passenger numbers dropped dramatically, and you also see the jump back in the year afterwards, and that will continue. So on the left side you see the evolution within the country itself, and on the right side you see how Italy compares with others. And Italy being a large country, it's perhaps not surprising that overall they have more passenger kilometers compared to the EU average. But you also see the modal share, and here you see that the picture for Italy is a bit below the European average, right? And you also see countries where it's above, also giving indication where are the countries where lessons could be learned from on how to improve this situation. Now on organizations, and this is an important part where ERA data comes in play. Till very recently, it was quite difficult to understand like how many railway organizations are active in different countries in Europe, and the situation varies substantially between the different countries. In the quiz we had a point on Poland, say with a license, sorry, I have to look at certified, so here we go. With a certified rail, so the rail freight undertakes with a safety certificate, and we saw that Poland was indeed the country with the most active freight operators. Now, in Italy, it is substantially lower, right? So it also gives an indication of the complexity, the spread, the market concentration in the markets, and the different situations between the countries. Whereas when you look at the situation for the passenger market, you see that in Italy there are relatively more operators, also giving indication of the level of competition. Now, when we move to the information on the rolling stock, I would say that this is the first time that this level of detail is publicly now available for researchers, for journalists, for everybody to see how the railway market, how the rolling stock market has evolved when the vehicles that are registered in the country were manufactured, and also to give a bit of an indication on the age profile of that fleet. Well, we saw that in Germany the average age of median age of a locomotive was about 30 years. You see here in Italy the median is about 37 years. So it also gives an indication of the age of the fleet and also the technical challenges that might be experienced when adapting a fleet. On the other end, when you look at the high-speed fleet, you see that this is considerably younger in Italy, also given the emphasis and the large investments that are being made in Italy in this particular segment, right? So it gives important background information. Mr. Doppelbauer was saying before the example of the night trains and the need for sleeping cars, and again here we can see some information on the age of the sleeping cars registered in Italy, and this holds true for all of Europe. The average age, the median age here is also 38 years, and that will be the same case for many other countries, indicating indeed the need for new vehicles, new rolling stock for this segment to redevelop. There's information on the infrastructure, line kilometers, how it evolves, the level of electrification, high-speed lines, on the ERTMS lines, and also some on the level crossings. And to give that example here, you see that in Italy quite a substantial effort has been made to reduce the number of passive level crossings, also contributing to the safety of the railway system. To move then to safety, gave the example of the significant accident rate, where indeed, as you see here on the right side, Ireland has performed best in 2022. You see that Italy also performs relatively very well. But it's also important to emphasize the large difference in accident rates between the countries, also showing the large potential and also large need to bring this divergence together, to make it smaller, to increase the overall safety of the European railway system, because there's still ample room for improvement here. There is information also, importantly, on the market, statistics that have been derived from the railway market monitoring study, information on punctuality, how the countries perform amongst each other in terms of the punctuality, reliability of passenger trains, but also on freight trains, which is still substantially lower, unfortunately, than for passenger. And besides that, there's also a section on the regulatory framework. What's for us as an agency very important is the number of national rules. We try to harmonize it on the European level, try to remove these national rules so that interoperability will improve. This is just one part of the picture, right? It needs to be interpreted also to understand like what the type of national rules are, also like how they are written down, how they're being processed, and there are some differences in countries here, but it gives a good first indication of how far each of the country is in reducing the national rules and what still needs to be done to create this unified single European railway area also from a technical perspective. So those kind of data can be retrieved from the fact sheets rather straightforward, in a straightforward way. Also pictures can be downloaded or own pictures can be made with the raw data that's available on the website. So with this, we would say that there's a rather quick, intuitive insight possible in the status of a railway system in all of the countries. I hope this gave a first good impression of the possibilities. I think we can also have a better look at it also later, maybe when the questions, we can focus on some other countries or some topics in more depth, but this should give a first good impression. I think at this point we can shift back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. So, what's next? The fact sheets have been launched a few months ago to test it, to see the feedback to receive, to improve some of the elements, to also decide upon the indicators, and to make some refinements. So that feedback has been adopted, but by no means it's a finished project. I think it's the first time that this level of detailed statistics on the country level are provided, and we certainly want to learn more. We also want to receive feedback, so we invite everybody warmly to provide this feedback, and also to indicate to us what kind of information will be valuable for you, what kind of information will be valuable for the European railway sector, where we can facilitate this data exchange and this data access, and the way how we can be communicated with is clearly visible also on our website. Besides that, we also looked at the evolution of linked data. Now, because the database has been set up in a rather isolated way, updating them and processing the data is a bit of a cumbersome process. Ideally, we want to evolve to a situation where the data can be real-time, updated automatically, and where also by having this interlinked data, we can create new indicators. My colleague Chris Carr will in a bit also provide way more detail on this, but I think this is a very promising development that also will benefit the sharing of data through the fact sheets. I think I will leave it here.
Well, many thanks, Mitchell. So I think that Mitchell has indeed met what we have announced in the invitation, the unlocking of railway data, but now I hand over to Chris Carr for presenting the new approach, linked data. I think you need to take the microphone, Chris.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning. So I think Joseph said at the start I'm going to teach you about linked data, and I want to manage your expectations at the beginning of this presentation. I'm at least going to explain what we're doing with linked data. At the beginning of the year, I think the agency, in response to the growing digital agenda, we created a new unit, the operational data unit, where we pulled together the work we were doing on linked data, the registers, and telematics to try and build the connections between those different work streams. And to start, this is not a quiz, but you've probably got, you can fill in the blanks. The data is the new oil, data is the new gold, whatever the terminology that you're used to and whatever that means to you. What I think I've found is a personal view, certainly in the area we work, we're treating data like wine. So we bottle it in small containers separately, we bury it deep, put it in the dark, and we don't go back to it. It's a bit like that. It's not very easy to access. And we wanted to try and address that issue in the way we work at the agency. So where does that problem come from? And this is a kind of generic problem statement whenever you're developing these new registers. So you always have the separate disciplines. They always for sure need their own application for their own purposes. They develop that, they encapsulate their data in there for their own needs, in their own systems, just focusing on their project need. That's normal. But the outcome of that is that projects running next to each other are developing similar, same things, but in isolation from each other. And then to avoid the messy world that we live in of having to talk to your neighbour and negotiate, do you mean this and I mean that, you tend to put sort of barriers between your system and the next system. You trust your data but not their data. So it's a little bit like that. And then finally you realise you do actually need to connect the data. So you spend your money and time building applications that link the databases together. The problem with that is, of course, it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it's fragile. As soon as somebody changes the system on one side of that connection, you risk to break the connection. So that's, I think, the generic problem statement. In our world, where does that come from? If you're based here in Brussels and you're following the agenda here, you'll know that you'll recognise this. There are numerous directives. We do things by directives, we do things by regulation, and they respond to a particular need at the time. The problem with that from a data-centric perspective is you do end up creating these separate regulations where you say the regulation for infrastructure is governed in this way, these people have these rights, and then you do another regulation and you think, oh, I wish we'd said in that regulation that this person could also do something because it would be more efficient now, but we're not there. So what we're trying to do, at least at the agency level, is to address that. We have a number of databases that have grown up over the years, and this is a kind of collection of some of them: a type register, a vehicle register, a register for infrastructure, a register for organisation codes, the register that has all the certificates and declarations of conformity. So anytime there was a problem, there's always a register, and that's the kind of the way it works. And we ran a pilot project to try and connect two of those using the emerging technology of linked data and semantics to say, actually, if we can break the data away from individual applications, so we treat the data separately and describe it in relation to the other data around it, a bit like how we normally see the world in reality, rather than in a traditional database. Can we actually can we run questions or queries of that data which don't require an expensive application? So we started looking at a way to digitize the systems for the infrastructure register, and it went quite well, to be honest, and we were excited about the early successes of that project. We didn't know what was coming next, which is the hard graft of getting all the registers to work together. But we proposed to the board that we ought to adopt a data-centric approach. Let's try and get away from the idea of separate registers and store data separately from applications. And that's not, although that was new to us at the time and probably new in the field that we're working in, I think for the average person browsing the internet these days, that's not new. I mean, that is how it works. So it was a bit of catch-up, if you like it, in that sense. But it opens up new possibilities. With a traditional database, it's a kind of patriarchal system where I design a database for a particular need, and you can use it for the need that I think I've decided you need. Whereas when you separate the data from the application and you make the data accessible, you allow people who have different needs, different views of the world to extract that data, to reuse it, for whatever application they want. So it frees up the possibility for innovation in the data field. To support that, we came up with some core principles. First of all, we said in future our data is going to be self-describing and machine readable. And that's important because it allows us to link between not just rail but the world around us, other registers, other data systems, and it won't require further interpretation, translation or proprietary software in order to be able to extract it and read it. It's going to be open in that as much as it can be open according to the regulation. And we're going to, as Joseph said, we're going to apply this kind of fair system. So it's got to be easily findable, it's not siloed, it's connected, it's based on linked data, it's based on ontology, which I'll come to in a moment, and we will map our legacy systems and annotate them according to that ontology so that data becomes findable, accessible, if you have the access rights of course, interoperable and reusable. And that's quite important for us as an agency because with the large number of registers and processes we're running, as Joseph described, the authorization process, that requires data in order for the assessment to be made. If we can link that data with the existing registers, we can speed that process up and we can get better data quality. We also wanted the kind of once only, and when we listened to people from the sector, the feedback was they have to supply similar data to different registers within the agency, but also different European institutions. It's more or less the same, but in a slightly different format. And that didn't seem to fit with us for a new world, where there's this general movement to once only, where I provide the data once into the system, and other people will take from that what they need. And then, of course, we had to tackle data security, and this is not only about the access rights, but of course the read write rights for the data itself. And here we were, because we've split data from an application, what we're having to do is to label the data and say what level of security does this data need, who can read it, alter it, that kind of thing, set at the data level rather than the application level. And then just to prove, and this is really slightly used for our internal stakeholders, just to prove it's not a crazy idea in one part of the building, it does actually align with the wider EC movement in the European digital program there, where we are using a semantic approach. We use increasingly open source software. We're thinking about how, as we revise the legislation for which we make recommendations to the Commission to adjust, we're trying to think about how to make that legislation digital ready, and to reuse software wherever we can to avoid having to buy or pay for or install new software. So I can't really see the animation happening here, but this is the first example we worked on at the agency. So if you want to operate a vehicle over a series of lines as an operator, you need to know if that vehicle is compatible with that route you want to run on. Does it fit physically? Is the track width right? Is the electrification system right? Are there any signalling system? Are there other things you need to know? Does it fit? So you've got the vehicle type register that has that data in that. That's one register. And you've got the infrastructure register that we have, which has data about, well, the infrastructure, the opposite side of the table is like. There's no connection between those two. You'd have to sit down, read the data in the ERA TV, read the data in RINF, and work out yourself whether or not that's right or wrong. With the semantic approach, what we did was to actually reformulate the infrastructure data into a knowledge graph. So this is an ontology-based system, and extract, at the moment we extract every 24 hours data from the type vehicle register into the knowledge graph, and that allows you to compare the data directly within the knowledge graph, so that we run an application which you can find on our website, where you can pick your type of vehicle, you can pick where you want to go from, and it will show you a comparison of the parameters of your vehicle and the infrastructure, and say where there might be incompatibilities. I think the reality of the world today is you still probably need to have a chat with the infrastructure manager before you run. You'll have to do that anyway. But it just gives you an indication of the areas where you might have an issue that you might want to discuss. And the strength of this was, so traditionally you've got that understanding, but you can ask the so what questions or the what if questions. And when we had the question around the solidarity lanes, can we move this type of vehicle from this part of the edge of Europe to somewhere else in Europe quite quickly? How could we do that? What are the routes? You can ask the system that, and it will show you the routes that will be most suitable for that, or most possible for that system. Then just a little bit on the mechanics of how we do that with an ontology. So you have your legal basis, you have the harmonized systems, and then what we've created is an ontology that describes digitally the infrastructure or the type vehicle register. We publish that ontology so that, I don't know if you'll get the presentations, I assume you get them later, or you have them, but there are links here which you can click on and check. So you can see the published ontology on the left hand side. We have a version of that which is a legal text now. We have the SKIOS concept scheme, so you can see how we've modeled the data in terms of the objects and the way we've grouped them. And then we have what we call shackle rules or shape constraint language rules, which say, and that just means really, it's an old mechanical engineer, what it means is we have rules around the data, so when the data is being uploaded, we know what it has to look like to be acceptable. And it gives us some rules around how the data can be used within the knowledge graph. And the thing that we are the team is most proud of the team for is on the right hand side of the slide. You can see there where in the recent TSI package in the omnibus text, where we revised the regulation on infrastructure, for the first time we think in railways, we have now a legal ontology published, and we have a process for updating that. And that allows anybody else who's working with railway topology to map their systems to that ontology and be sure that it's a stable basis for building their system. I'll try and fly through the next slides for you. Ontology. So ontology really is about describing the objects, the grouping of those objects, and the properties of the individual objects, and the relationship between that object and another object in the system. So I think the example we would use is we think of things in triples normally now. So you would say Brussels Central is a station, it's a connection in Belgium. And Belgium is a country in Europe. So you can quite easily, you can see from that simplistic description how you can extend that ontology quite easily. If you want to add a new property or add a new concept to the knowledge graph, it's quite easy to do at the ontology level. At the application level, it might be more complicated. But the main advantages we've listed here, we describe the data in a homogeneous way. It does allow us to improve data quality over time, because you end up cross-checking data. There are data mismatches which allow you to say, hold on, you've said this is a railway location, but when we compare the geo-coordinates here, it's nowhere near a railway line, so what is it? And so that does allow us to look at the data quality. We find we can link the data sets, and that's one of the key elements of linked data. We can link the data sets much more easily. And we're using now standard W3C industry standards for linked data. Now, Sparkle queries. So we it's a language. So we on our website you'll see we expose the knowledge graph as an endpoint. So if you're an IT person, you can connect your system to extract the data without an application. You can also ask the knowledge graph whatever you want to ask it. So instead of having your questions to your data query confined by a traditional database in rows and columns, you can imagine a question you want to ask it, and you can ask it. So today you need to write the Sparkle query for that, and if you're not a Sparkle querier, most of us are not, I guess, you can ask us, and we will write that query for you, and then you can copy paste it into your browser, and it will run it and give you the answer or should give you the answer. And we publish some of those common queries that people ask us for reuse if you want to reuse them. And we're working on a more friendly system. The data that's findable, reusable, and as I said, expandable. So that's, I think, the main advantages for us. And then we're moving a bit into the what's coming next. We've taken the railway infrastructure data that we have, and that's, if you know the new regulations, you'll know that we're going to have to do much more with that data, so we're adding to that already. We're going down to a micro level description of the data, of the infrastructure. But we're also now adding the vehicle register, the new European vehicle register, in the same way. And there we're in the process with the Commission of revising the regulations in order to enact a linked data approach for the vehicle register, and to open up the data, hopefully to open up the data. At the moment, this register is not open, surprisingly. Even if you can stand in a station and look at the vehicle physically and see all the data painted on the side of it, you're not allowed to see it in a computer. You've got to stand on the platform and look at it. But we're hoping to address that in the new regulation. And then from safety, that Joseph touched on, there is a new common safety method coming on information sharing. And we don't have yet, at the European level, a system for sharing safety occurrences that allow you to spot trends across the different member states. So this is coming, and we're building that, as you can imagine now, with a linked data approach in mind from the beginning, which will allow you, if you're curious about a set of occurrences, or how many incidents occurred with poor visibility or during snow, or that kind of data, things that you wouldn't normally think to ask, or when you design the system you didn't think to encode it in the system, you will be able to ask the knowledge graph of that, which is why we're so pleased about it. And then the other element we're working on next year is the driver's route book. So today all of the drivers have a route book in a different, some have it digitally, some have it in paper. It contains the main elements they need for driving on that and operating on that route. They're not sitting reading it while they drive, I can assure you that. But it's important for them to, it's how you communicate driver about important information to the driver on that route. And so one of the things we're working on is how to take the infrastructure data that we will have in micro-level description, agree with the community of railway operators to look at what information do drivers normally need, and how could we extract that in a digital format and come up with a common format that they can reuse. They're not obliged to use it. Every RU, of course, can elaborate or build their own, but having a common basis that we allow drivers to use, and I think that means that as the infrastructure data is updated, of course, you're seeing that the most recent data, and we can check that the route book information is actually coherent with the infrastructure data we have. Last two, I promise. So just expanding on the ontology. We talked about the information sharing tool for safety and the European Vehicle Register. We have, and guess what, we have other registers, so we're also tackling those. One called ERADIS, and that contains the safety certificates, the vehicle authorization certificates, the NOBO certificate, the notified body certificates, all of those things which underpin the work the agency does on, and the NSAs do on checking whether a vehicle can be authorized or not. And today it's worked mostly on the exchange of looking at, scanned copies of documents, and we will turn that into data. So the system will at least be able to say, this, if you reference a certificate, the system will know, is that the right certificate for this kind of vehicle? And if it's not, the system can flag that already. So that's a little bit what we're doing. As I said, we're going to work on driver route book, converging with other systems that use infrastructure data. And one area we're interested in is validity dates for infrastructure to allow you to project into the future. And this is something the Commission's interested in, I think, for things like ETCS deployment on corridors, to understand, okay, this is the situation today, you can see it, but if I look at this corridor in 15, 20 years' time, what is the planned, how will it look in terms of a planned signalling system on that corridor? So using validity dates, we think we should be able to offer that functionality and a notification system. And just the last thing on what we're looking at next year is, So I mentioned the Sparkle query. So if you're a Sparkle query, you don't need this next development, and you're fine as you are. If you're not, then we've looked, and I think it was a colleague from Infrabel who tested this, of developing a small bot, and you just write in the bot your natural language question. It understands the natural language question. It writes the Sparkle query for you. It executes the Sparkle query and gives you the information. So that's a little bit what we want to work on next year, which will allow my mum to check, once she learns how to use the iPad we bought her, but she'll allow my mum to check the data if she's interested in looking at that. And she doesn't need to be an IT expert to do that. Just the last slide then on areas that we need to work on. The great thing, I'm not by trade not a digital person, I'm a mechanical engineer as I started, but what the nice thing is having negotiated lots of these legal texts and concepts with all the experts from different member states and different organisations, what digital brings is it tests you on, do you really understand the same thing between two people? When you agreed platform curvature, what does this person mean by platform curvature? What does this person mean? And you find, surprisingly, that they could all agree the legal text in the negotiation because they all had a different idea what they meant when they agreed it. But when you get into the digital world, you have to be precise. So this gives a bit more precision. The concepts we know are not harmonised across the union, not harmonised sometimes even within member states, not harmonised even within organisations. And we need an earlier involvement of the data experts to support the railway domain experts when they're designing legislation or when they have expressing a need in data terms. How does a data person see that, and how can they help? If you read some of the old regulations, you'll even see pictures of computers in the regulation itself. What should the computer look like? Like this, someone sitting at a screen typing, and that's the kind of where we came from. Whereas now what we're saying is, please just put the functional requirements in the legislation and let the IT data people work out how to deliver that functional requirement. Don't lock us into calling it a register or as soon as you start to call it a register, people think it's got to exist physically and uniquely, and so we're a little bit trying to test that. So that's the cultural change in the way we see legal text. The other thing I wanted to pick up on, the last three important points for us were the use case around the purpose, so the traditional safety RAMS assessment. So we can make the infrastructure data available to anybody, and you could use it for anything you want. But what should you use it for? And what do we warrant that data for? So the infrastructure manager uploads that data to comply with the regulation. But do they say it's okay to use it for designing route book yet? Do they say it's okay to use it for signalling layout? And that kind of question we need to understand to inform the user that this data is okay to use for these things. But pay attention, if you're using it for this, we're not sure that the reliability, availability, accuracy of the data is going to be good enough for that safety-related purpose. So I think that's the discussion we now need to have. Then we have this data resolution problem. If two different registers disagree, who's right? And that's a little bit the data resolution process. And then finally, is about the culture of open data. We don't have that broadly here. It's an emotive topic. But what we're hoping is that increasingly with the stakeholder community, we can say, look, we agree this data is commercial, needs to be locked, but all this data, can it not be open for everybody, or can it be open under certain conditions? So that's a little bit the debate we're having, and I think from that will take time because it's not traditionally the approach we've taken. I gave the example of the vehicle register. It's a closed register, so how do we open that up, and which elements can legitimately be kept private? That's the challenge we'll face, I suppose, and that's linked data for us.
So many thanks, Chris, and I believe we could give you in the past 80 minutes or so an overview how important data and information are for the operation and the optimization of railways and how important this entire new IT aspect has become for the agency. Now we are, of course, at your disposal for any question you might have. Please, the floor is yours. And we have Christina here with a microphone, if you have got a question. There is a question here in the front row. And please introduce yourself.
It's okay now? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bogdanis Opascu, Radio Romania. I'm wondering if this tool of yours allowed you to draw some conclusions about the new, let's say, hot zone between Ukraine and the Europe in terms of developing new lanes of railways or somehow? Thank you.
Well, obviously we have now the possibility to do various analyses, and the application that you just mentioned, how could we efficiently transport grain from the Ukraine to Europe, could be one possible application. I believe, Chris, we even did some concrete examples, if you want to elaborate.
Yes, so we did do, using the route compatibility check tool, we were able to compare the compatibility of different grain hopper wagons to run on different corridors between the border and a European port, to be able to show which routes might be possible for further examination. What we were not able to do yet, and it's a bit to do with the open data element, is if you said, but where are the available grain wagons that you could rent? Don't know. That data's not open. So and so that's a little bit, I think, what we're missing compared to other countries. But for the corridors they could operate on, we could work that out. The other element that was more difficult is we can do that for a vehicle type that we know, so a European, already authorized European grain hopper. If you ask the question, these American grain hoppers that are huge, is there any corridor that an American grain hopper would fit on? Then, because it's not described as a European type, we don't know the answer to that question yet, and that's something the team is looking at. Can we create fake types in our internally, which allow us then to compare the vehicle with the infrastructure? So that's will be one of the issues here.
But what this example also clearly shows is the importance of open data. Earlier this year we had a conference with, or a Teams call with the American Association of Railroads, AER, and despite being a fully commercial operation in competition, they are sharing everything. They are sharing which wagons are where, how many load are they carrying, etc. And in Europe we are not yet beyond that culture change, but in order to do what you suggested, we would need the data. Is there any other question? Carol, please.
Good morning. Carol Kuhn, Secretary General of the Association of European Rail Rolling Stock Lessors. I have a question regarding the culture of open data. You probably know that all my members are not convinced that it can really have an added value for the sector in the current context. So my question is, if you compare with other sectors, I guess that not all the actors are so enthusiastic with making their data open data, public. What are the arguments that are used to convince these who are not convinced?
Well, I let Chris answer this question.
Yes, thank you. So we would. I think we would accept. I mean, if you're a believer in open data, you just think open data is good for transparency and all kinds of societal benefits. But I'm not gonna try and run that argument. So there clearly is some data which legitimately you can understand commercial bodies would like to keep locked, like ownership, and some of the, I think some around the question of even the who's the vehicle keeper and that kind of thing. The problem is that data is not locked today. It's locked digitally, but it's open. If you go to any vehicle, the keeper marking is painted on the side of the vehicle with the vehicle
Has
number.
to be legally painted.
So that the data is not private. It's just not available. You're not able to process it in bulk. So that's a bit the nuance of that. There are lots of studies which indicate that there is a GDP benefit from opening data. So I can send you the links to some of those. I'm not an economist, so I don't know if it's economic magic that drives this, but I think there is increasing evidence that by opening up that data you allow that. And I think that my only other plea would be, and there is a startup somewhere in Europe that's doing the equivalent of kind of blah blah car, which allows you for wagons, which allows you to effectively say, I want to rent a wagon going from A to B to move something. And my only plea would be, so I think the argument within rail for not exposing data is about the anxiety or the concern of your competitor in rail taking your business if they understand your business model. So that's rail to rail, red on red type competition. But if you look at the European data around climate change and the modal shift needed to tackle the existential threat of climate change, that's not the fight. The fight is how to get more people to use rail. And I honestly believe if you make the data open so people can easily think, would rail be an option? Can I run it? Where can I run it? Is there a train available today? Is there a wagon available that I can rent or use? You at least open up that possibility to them. If you don't do that, it's just much easier to pick up the phone, call the road haulier, and within Europe, unless you're doing big distances, once the container's on the back of a lorry, it's not coming off. It's not going back onto rail. So I think my plea would be, if we can think about the concern the sector has about interrail, rail on rail competition, how can we resolve that problem while still opening up the market to people who are today not using rail but might think about using rail in the future? So that's a bit the argumentation we're running. I think in the last risk committee, the commission position was if you paint your data on the side of a vehicle, you can't argue it's private. If I paint my phone number on the side of a building, I can't then claim it's personal data and no one's allowed to see it because I myself have painted it on the side. So I think I think we need an ongoing discussion clearly. But
Mitchell wants to add, please.
I can give an example. Also, for one project, there also was a need to analyze the vehicle data, and operators were not willing to give this data. So what we did instead was look at open source data. Rail spotters, as Chris says, it's visible. And rail spotters, you have people who are fanatically also structuring this data, maintaining this data, and also putting it out in the open. What we found out was that 99% of the data that we could publicly retrieve through various websites was correct when we did spot checks. So operators didn't want to give this data, but it was out in the open. It just is cumbersome. It is costly to collect this data. So I understand for some parts indeed the worry and the confidentiality concerns, but for lots of data it's already out in the open. It's just that it is difficult to attain.
Oh, and as Chris said, the real name of the game is the necessity to shift modal share from road to rail. So the competition should be seen outside the rail sector. And for me, a really and truly convincing argument is if the American railroads, who are absolutely commercial organizations in competition with each other, see the benefit of sharing openly data, there must be a commercial advantage, otherwise they wouldn't do it. Any further question? Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. I thank you very much for being with us this morning here in the Press Club in Brussels. We are, of course, at your disposal for any private question you might have after the event. Thank you very much for coming, and see you at our next year's press event here at the same place. Thank you very much.
But it will be on the website.